as you come on in, I will just do a few announcements. I bet that you found us through our meetup page, but I will just drop that link there. This is where we organize our events. We shoot for monthly events. Most having something most months. We've got some really nice ones that are coming up over the next couple months, which so you can take a look there and see what we're up to. This is a friendly and professional space, and so my name is Julia. I'm one of the organizers, and I'll be moderating. And Andrew is another one of our organizers who is also here moderating. We use the our consortium's our community code of conduct. So I'll drop a link to that here. And we are very happy to have had a history of really great conversation and really great community feel here in this group. But I'll just share that to say that that is how we work with each other here in this group. I'll just highlight a couple things as we wait a few minutes for people to come in. I'm excited for the next couple meetings that we have. We have when we do talks, we tend to do them remotely like this, like via Zoom, because it's really convenient. It's easy for people to see, and we've got our one this month is from a local Salt Lake person, and our meeting next month is also from a local Salt Lake person, which is really fun and exciting to see. We sometimes have speakers from a bit further afield. The May event, Maëlle Salmon is joining us all the way from France, so that will be very fun. And then we do maybe roughly quarterly have an in-person sort of networking event, sort of networking social gathering. And so if you are in the Salt Lake area or where that is doable for you to get, like you're in Utah or the greater Salt Lake area, we have a networking in-person gathering in April. So we'll be meeting in Mill Creek for ice cream in April some afternoon. So it's like at a slightly later time in our day than this. So we are currently it's lunchtime here in Utah. So we think about these as like sort of a brown bag lunch kind of talk. So that's what is up with us. We're really glad to have you join us, especially those of you who are new. I know we have people joining from all over who come and listen to these. I will introduce our speaker and then we can get going because many of you I know it is lunchtime and you maybe are on a break and then need to get back to work. So Bart, I'm really happy to welcome you. I know you've spoken for us before. But Bart Polson is the founder of datalab.cc. He's also a video author for LinkedIn Learning and a professor of psychological science at Utah Valley. So Bart has a PhD in social and personality psychology from City University of New York and is very experienced with applied data work. And Bart, I love that you've come to us with this background with like consulting with nonprofits and big corporations, government organizations, because all that experience I think is really relevant, especially to the kind of talk that we're going to have here. And if you want to follow Bart or see what he does, you can see on the meetup page the link to his LinkedIn. I'll drop it here as well. But Bart, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for preparing this talk. We're really excited to hear what you have to say about making your data work actionable.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks folks for coming in and for seeing this. I know you have both a meetup group and I posted this on LinkedIn, so I think we may have some people who are not normally here. But thanks for coming. Now, I have to tell you, there's going to be a major challenge with my presentation today. And that's, I'm going to say stuff and people are going to go, well, duh, I know that. Everything I'm going to say is going to sound obvious, but I guarantee you people don't do it all the time. And so my struggle here is to say, no, really, I'm telling you this for a reason. And it's a little bit like when I tell my students, that was in the syllabus. And so I'm going to be saying things that a lot of things might seem obvious to you, but you have to think about specific examples that you have worked on where some of these things may or may not have worked, okay? So again, In the abstract, it's easy to nod your head and go, yeah, uh-huh, 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 uh-huh. But I guarantee you, actually, you want to know what this is really inspired by is I did some consulting with a global energy company, and we were working with their professional data analysts. So these are people who already had all their training, they were technically very competent, and they were already employed by this massive company. And we were, I mean, this is it's a gargantuan company. And what we found is that while these people were technically very, very skilled, when it came time to doing an analysis that made sense to their bosses, they crashed and burned. And so my job was not to come in and teach them, this is how you program and this is how you do this algorithm and this is like, this is how to make sense. And this is how to do your work and not have it get ignored because nobody knows what you're talking about or what to do about it. I've also seen this in the academic world. A lot of times somebody does a huge project and again, they're technically very skilled, but it's all the other stuff that goes around it that makes the work have impact that's a problem. So with that, I'm actually going to turn to my presentation. And all right, Julia, can you confirm that people now see my first slide, the
Yep, we
title?
see your slide and we can hear you. It looks great.
Wonderful. All right. Well, my talk is making your data work actionable. By the way, I use the term data work as a generic for data science, data analysis, statistics, analytics, what have you. So I want you to think about a time that you did an analysis, and I want you to think about you finish your analysis, you've done all this amazing work to gather the data and to get it into shape. And I mean, some of my best coding I've ever done was just in wrangling the data to get it prepared. And you do your brilliant analysis. And then at the end of it, somebody raises their hand and just says, okay, so what? So what does this mean for us? What does this change anything? And I have seen people not able to answer this question, and instead they just kind of start crying because they just don't know how to express what they found or what it means, and they feel that they've blown it and people are exasperated with them. And obviously this is what we don't want for you, but I'm willing to bet that all of you can think of a time that you did an analysis that you were very proud of, you showed it to somebody else and they just didn't get it. And so what we're trying to do is have your hard work and your skill pay off by making the implications and the consequences of it really painfully clear to other people. So I want to talk about three specific things to focus on. The first one is on actions. What are people going to do? Not this is nice to know, or you might want to consider this, but specifically, I mean, like, what are their bodies going to do in physical space as a result of your analysis? The second one is you got to start thinking about return on investment, or ROI, maybe in terms of money, but there's a lot of other ways to think about it. I'll talk about that. And I mention that because there are fields of research that simply do not address this. And then the last one is about clarity. And this is specifically in communicating with your stakeholders, both in designing the project and in communicating the results of it. So actions, ROI, and clarity are three things I want to talk about very briefly. The first one is I have to use a management buzzword, but it is the appropriate term, and it's actionable insights. This is the key. If there's nothing else you get out today, I want you to remember the phrase actionable insights. And when you do your analyses, it has to finish with actionable insights. Now, let me explain what that means. You know, of course, when you do an analysis, you find patterns in the data. And maybe you even have insights about what those things mean, but you need that extra step about actions. Specifically, what are people going to start doing? Again, think about physical bodies moving in physical space. What are they going to start doing as a result of your analysis? Or maybe there's something that they need to stop doing as a result of your analysis. And then, of course, the third category is something they keep doing, but perhaps with increased confidence as a result of your analysis. So you see in all of these, the analysis provides a foundation for doing. I have a newsletter on LinkedIn that's called Data is for Doing. And the idea is that your data doesn't mean nearly as much as it can and still until it affects what people do. And again, I'm going to say that for the third time. I'm talking about physical behaviors in the real physical world. What are they going to do as a result of it? Okay, now let's take a quick example. And let's say you have a customer, a client who's interested in customer loyalty, that they're selling sporting goods and they want to have people, once they get in, they want to keep them because maybe it's a lot easier to keep a customer than it is to get a new one. So loyalty is an important thing to anybody who's selling stuff online. And let's think about a stakeholder, a client who sells sporting goods online and in stores across the United States. And they're interested in customers who make repeat purchases because those are very valuable customers to them. And here's the little tidbit. Here's the pattern that they find in the data. Customers in the upper Midwest region, so that's Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin, are more likely to make repeat purchases than customers in other regions. Okay, there's a pattern. And well, you've got this geographical thing in the data, but is it actionable? And I'm going to tell you right now, the association between geographic region, upper Midwest, and customer loyalty, that those people are more likely to make repeat purchases, is potentially actionable. But in and of itself, well, you don't control where people live, and you don't control who makes purchases, and you don't control who visits your website. And so at face value, no, this is not actionable. There's no clear path forward. And again, think about times that you have worked on projects and you find a pattern and it means something to you and you see it as an easy inference, like, so everybody knows it's obvious that you would do this other thing as a result. But again, if it's not spelled out clearly, it's not something that provides a clear path forward and it's not directly actionable. I mean, and so what you need to do is you need to think about what is in your direct control or your client's control. I mean, think about if you're a DJ. You can choose the songs, you can choose the volume, you can choose the lights, but you don't get to choose who's on the dance floor. You don't get to choose whether they dance. You're trying to get these impacts that affect those other things, but you don't have direct control over them, and your clients and your stakeholders don't either. And so it's important to remember what is in fact in your direct control. And when it comes to this example of online marketing, well, you can control your prices and the offers, the incentives that you give people. You can control your timing when you send them out. You can control the channels that you use. You can vary your appeals by market segment. So you have some options. These are the things that are under your control. Now, the next thing I want to mention is return on investment. And this is a concept that a lot of people may not be comfortable with. It's economics. And what it has to do is, what are you getting back for what you put in? And I mention this because my background is I'm trained as a research psychologist. And I also got a lot of training in what's called evaluation research. Or sometimes for certain fields, it's just called outcomes research. And so people like to say, well, if you do this educational method, or if you do this training method, or if you do this reward system, then these are the outcomes. And yes, that's very important to know, but it is nowhere close to sufficient. outcomes are only part of the equation. And you can't make any defensible recommendations until you know not just the outcomes, but the costs, what you have to do to get that outcome, because that's going to change the entire calculation. So I want you to think about costs and benefits explicitly. And while people are used to thinking about ROI strictly in terms of economics, there's a lot more that can go into it. So for instance, in terms of costs, yeah, there's the purchase cost. How much does it cost to get this software, to get this hardware, to get this physical location you're going to do a store? But there's also training costs. How hard is it to learn how to use something productively, at a professional level? I'll tell you right now, I still can't program JavaScript to save my life. And I am able to do Python, but I got to look up everything I do. I'm much more comfortable with R, and some things are just easier to learn than others. Also, costs can include things like productivity lost while people are trying to make the adaptations. My school, UVU, switched from, they said we couldn't use Zoom anymore, and that we couldn't use Google Docs, and that we had to switch over to Microsoft Teams. Might have something to do with our university president being a former Microsoft executive, but it's just really hard for me to learn how to store and share documents again in a new thing. So there's some productivity lost. Another one is troubleshooting. Anytime you institute a new program, things are going to go wrong. And are people going to be able to fix it on their own? Are you going to be able to head off some of the problems? I mean, there's a lot of things to think about. Another one is morale. You institute a new policy, you institute a new practice, and it's irritating to people. And I'm choosing some pretty tame examples, but I can tell you right now, here in Utah, here in the United States, we're having gargantuan changes in all sorts of ways that are affecting all of these things. Now, you do have benefits. And again, those benefits might include easily measured financial profits. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Money is, fungibility is a great thing, easy to convert, that one's easy to value. But you can also, in the e-marketing world, maybe you have new customers. Those are valuable to you, or you have improved efficiency. You can get more things done, and then you can have improved morale where people are happier to work where you are, and you can get better reviews online. I know companies that are ranked as some of the best places to work, and not because they pay a lot, because they don't, but they make it a very comfortable place to work where you feel seen, you feel valued, and you move along that way. I can tell you right now, I'm a university professor, and university professors do not get paid a lot compared to people who are working out in the professional world. One of the huge perks of being a university professor, though, is the possibility of getting tenure. And it doesn't mean that you have a guaranteed job for life, but it makes it a much more secure position, and that it has a measurable impact on who's willing to work, take the job, and commit to it, even if the pay is not that great. So there are lots of different ways of looking at costs and benefits. Some of them are strict financial, some of them aren't. And you, as the analyst, when you are making your recommendations to your stakeholders, it becomes incumbent on you to start addressing specifically the costs and the benefits of the recommendations that you're making. Because again, you're giving them actionable insights. Based on the analysis, you should start doing this. Based on the analysis, you should stop doing that. But you always want to be able to give a cost and benefit, or a return on investment, on how you do it. Now, there are some complications. There are sometimes returns over time. You can make an investment, but maybe you're not going to see any good return on that investment this year or immediately, but it's long-term. Education falls into that category. There's also adjusting for risk. It's not guaranteed that this outcome is going to happen. There might be a 70% chance of this good outcome, but a 20% chance of this bad outcome, and you have to adjust for that. So you can learn to get expected values and use those in your equations. There's also realized versus unrealized gains. If you've ever worked in finance, then you know about accruals. And that is, do you count a sale that happens right now, but it doesn't actually get delivered or paid until next quarter or next year? And how do you account for that? And there's also the questions of absolute versus relative value, especially given the size of your organization. There's a lot more here. And so it's not like you have a single button that says ROI on your computer. There are a lot of decisions that go into it. I mean, think of the same way that you have to make a lot of decisions in developing your models. You know, for instance, parameters make a big difference. The same thing is true when calculating ROI and the costs and benefits of your work. Now, you don't have to be super formal about it, and you don't have to translate everything to dollar values. I mean, maybe people respond well to dollar values, but you can also just get a piece of paper and write the costs or the investment on one side and write the benefits or the return on the other side. And it might include dollars, but it really could include things like how happy or frustrated are people, how hard or easy is this to do. That all goes into it. And the nice thing about doing it this way is you don't have to explicitly weight things, meaning you can show your client, here's a list of the costs, here's a list of the benefits, and they can decide what parts of that are most important to them and how they are going to give weight to each of those costs and benefits. But it's important to be explicit about the entire process. The third thing is about clarity, or presenting your insights, your actionable insights, with clarity so people know what you're actually telling them to do. So I have a very short list of graphs that I use, and I actually think graphs should be the first choice. And they are bar charts, and they are line charts, and then maybe, if the situation really requires it, a scatter plot, and that's it. I have a background in design. I studied design my first 3 years in college. I've got shelves full of books on beautiful graphs. I've bought all of Edward Tufte's books twice. I love this stuff, but you're going to get a lot more mileage out of bar charts and line charts. Bar charts for showing the quantity of something in different groups or comparing groups, line charts for showing changes over time, and a scatter plot maybe for showing the relationship between two variables. And the other thing is showing graphs one at a time so people know exactly what to focus on. Now, I'm going to give you a few examples of this. This is a bar chart that I made, and this is of the contiguous continental United States, divvied up into 4 regions, and we go from south to Midwest to west to northeast, and the number of states. I made this in Google Sheets. I love Google Sheets in part because it doesn't muck up its graphs. I still had to clean this one up just a tiny bit, but simpler is better. This one is very easy to read. By the way, you'll notice that I put these in descending order, the tallest bar on the left to the shortest bar on the right. That's a really good way to do it. But bar charts are super easy to read, and I strongly recommend you use them as often as possible. This is also a bar chart. It's just turned sideways. When you have long labels that would otherwise be hard to read and require people to turn their head, this is a good approach. This is based on a research paper that classified the 48 continental United States by personality type based on online profiles. And most of them were friendly and conventional. A smaller number were temperamental and uninhibited, and the smallest group, relaxed and creative, which interestingly includes Utah, is there at the bottom with 10 states. But again, really easy to read. Now, you can start breaking things up. This is a grouped bar chart, which is taking the personality profiles and the geographical regions and showing them together. It gets a little busy, and so don't do it unless you really need to do it. Okay, a line chart. This is from Google Trends, and this is the search popularity for the term AI. And what you can see is that, man, did it jump in 2022, and that November 22 is when ChatGPT was released. The spike that you see before that is when DALL-E came out and the other image generating AIs. But man, ChatGPT right there in November of 22, it goes through the roof. And so this is really easy to see a huge change. And again, I had to clean it up a little bit. You want to make it as easy to read as possible. I'm also saying specifically that it's the US. I'm specifically saying what the time frame is. I'm making it as clear as possible. But more than that, it's really helpful to put your actionable insights directly on the graphs. When I make a presentation, it is one graph per slide, and I put this is what you do about it directly on the slide. And it looks like this. So here are the states where I'm looking at the number of people. I'm actually showing not the number of states, but the population of those states. And I'm able to say that right here, more people live in friendly and conventional states. So this should be the first campaign. If you're planning online campaigns, this says start here. So I'm pointing, this is why I'm doing it. This bar is the longest, so start here. Again, I'm guiding behavior. Now, this is where I go to my slightly more complicated graph, the grouped bar chart. But I start with pointing at this bar on the very left. Create a specific campaign for the friendly and conventional Midwestern states. And then I say, create a specific one for the temperamental and uninhibited Northeast. By the way, you'll see that all of the states in the Northeast fall into this category. Then I come over and say, create a specific campaign for relaxed and creative Western states. And then finally, I say, but the South in the United States can benefit from all three campaigns because it has people in all three categories. And so this is a way of just putting it right on there. And I'm pointing at this one thing and do this as a result of it. Again, I'm making the connection from data to action as clear as possible. And doing it with graphs and showing one thing at a time is a great way to do that. Now, in a line chart, this is still Google Trends. Now it's showing three different searches: machine learning in blue, data science in red, and artificial intelligence in yellow or gold. And I'm showing the pattern over time, and I'm saying, the blue and the red, which are machine learning and data science, they track really closely with each other. And what I'm able to say is emphasize the terms machine learning and data science for technical audiences. So if you're talking to people who work in the field, use those terms. They've been really popular and they're kind of interchangeable, at least in terms of their relative interest. On the other hand, when I add the search term AI, which is distinct from the search term artificial intelligence, you get a dramatically different result. You see, the other three search terms are still there. They're just down near zero, relatively speaking. And I say AI has gone through the roof. This is the data I showed you a moment ago. And I'm able to say, but emphasize the term AI for general audiences. So if you know who your audience is, then use that term. And so I'm guiding the behavior and I'm making it clear from the graphs why I'm doing this. So the overall point about all of this is you need to connect the dots from data to action for your stakeholder. I say, I've done the analysis and I am now telling you what to do. And I'm showing you where in the analysis, I'm showing you what the thing was in the data that led me to this conclusion about what you should do. And if you can connect the dots adequately, your clients will thank you. Your message will be clear and you will have accomplished your purpose as an analyst. And with that, I am done with that presentation.
Nice.
And
Thank you.
so
Oh, go ahead.
I
Sorry.
actually don't know what our time frame is, but I would love to talk about some of this.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Bart. That was really interesting to think kind of specifically about, like concretely about like what are the things that actually help people uh, hear what you're saying, know what you're saying. That's really helpful. Thank you.
I'm just gonna mention the place where this shows up that's most aggravating for me is again, I'm an academic. And when I was in grad school, we would have, the quote unquote, the brown bags. And so somebody would come in and present their research. And the joke is that every academic research project in the world ends by saying further research is needed.
Yeah, that's
Like,
right.
yeah, we don't know. We have something that's maybe, possibly, maybe, and I understand because nothing is certain, but it always ended with this like, well, there's more stuff. Um, my
Yes, give us
favorite
more money.
That's right. That's
my
right.
favorite research project was one that I did as part of a nonprofit service event I do called the Data Charrette. And some people may participate in that, but this one was before the pandemic. But one of the organizations we worked with was the Springfield Museum of Art. And they came to us with a very specific question where they said, here's our attendance data. Should we continue to be open on Sunday? And so they just wanted a yes or a no, not, well, there's a 97% chance that your confidence intervals between here and here. They just want, tell us what to do, yes or no. And we were able to do a pivot table. I mean, we looked at weather patterns, we looked at this and that and the other, and we said, okay, museums, people come no matter what because it's school groups, and they've booked it out months in advance, and they're coming. But we were able to do a pivot table and say, you know what? People are only coming on Sundays to see the concerts that you have outside once a month. They're not coming to see the collection. So you do not need to have the collection open on Sundays. You can safely close that without losing visitors to your collection, which they did. And so we were able to give them a very clear yes or no to that specific question. That was beautiful.
Yeah, that's cool. Nice. So we've got, if you have questions that this brings up for you, you can type them in the chat, or you can use the Q&A feature. So Eric has asked a question about this idea of storytelling. Like, I often hear about this, and specifically, it's like, is it a good idea to have or write a story? I think this is an interesting question because I think often as data people, it is interesting to kind of navigate, like, I have a perspective and an opinion and I am telling a specific story versus, like, I'm just gonna need to just show in an unbiased way, right? Like what the data says, right? And like then I leave. So I guess this is a question about opinion. I guess this isn't a question about like how opinionated data analyses that are impactful are. What do you think about this idea of like adopting norms from storytelling, or like having or writing a story that your data then tells? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's a very attractive term, and I do think, but I tend to use it in a very minimalist form. Your story, you're telling a story, but it's a very, very short story. It's closer to a haiku. Um, and again, it's because, remember, the focus needs to be on the needs of the stakeholder. What they asked you to do this project because they have a question. And I usually do it as like, this is what your question was, and this is what our answer is. And if there's anything that's funky that goes through it, I will talk about it. But I think that the trick with storytelling is you want to be very careful, because that makes it sound like we're going to go through like the hero's journey, and we're going to go through this challenge and that challenge and that challenge. And the problem is that makes it, your stakeholder might say, wait a second, I thought you said this was the answer, but now you're saying that's not the answer, but this answer, but no, it's not really. And it's hard for them to say, like, okay, so now is that the answer? And so I only introduce qualifications if it's really important, if they already really think that. I'll give you an example about that. Is everybody's familiar, I imagine, with the UC Berkeley admissions data set. And it's a sample data set in a lot of different places. And it has to do with this situation that came up in the early 70s of people applying for graduate school at UC Berkeley. And what they found overall was that men were more likely to be admitted than women. And so this immediately became sort of a class action lawsuit that we have discrimination here. Was Title IX in place in the early 70s?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
I can't remember the date,
Yeah.
but it definitely it led to a lawsuit. And Berkeley turned around and said, like, okay, we're going to find the offending programs and we're going to learn them a lesson. And what they did is they went to each of these different graduate programs and they said, wait a second, we're not finding a consistent preference for male applicants in the different programs. In fact, some of them there was no real difference. Some of them even there was a higher rate of women getting in, and so they're kind of like, what's going on? And now the problem is this case is using an example of Simpson's paradox. That you can get patterns that flip around when you have aggregated versus disaggregated data. And in this one, people didn't go, oh, well, it wasn't there. It's just a paradox. It didn't really, there's no problem because, when you disaggregate it, it all goes away. And I go, no, that does not solve the problem. What it does is it punts it and it puts it a little further down because what they found is that men were more likely to apply to graduate programs that took a lot more people and had higher acceptance rates. Women were more likely to apply to programs that were much smaller and had lower acceptance rates overall. Anyway, okay, and that's enough to produce Simpson's paradox. But you go like, why is it that the programs that men are applied to are so much bigger and better funded? And why is it that the programs that women apply to are so much smaller and have so much less funding? So we haven't answered the question. We just said it's a little different from what we originally thought it was. So in terms of storytelling, yeah, I think that's a great one. But I would not want to introduce elements just to have a little captivating narrative. I mean, don't do storytelling for its own sake. It's only if it's going to introduce that one. And I use that particular case because the UC Berkeley admissions data set is well known and it's very common for people to think, well, once you've found the disaggregation paradox, you're done. And I go, no, you're not. You're not done. It's just there's another layer to it that you have to address.
Yeah. Andrew, you had an interesting comment here. Do you want to speak to that at all? Like if you have the storytelling mindset with data, like are you starting with the story or, like I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, I think it's a good point back to what Bart said about like the question, like what is the question that we're trying to answer? And if you're coming at it as this is our hypothesis, or this is what we want a question that we want to answer from the data, rather than trying to tell a specific story. If you're going in with the storytelling mindset, it's very easy to say this is the story that we want to tell before you even have collected your data. And if the data does not fit your story, what do you do then? Do you wrangle the data until you can tell the story that you want to tell? Or, I mean, we get into trouble with that. We're not trying to there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. So we are trying to answer questions. And if you're coming at it with that of like, this is the answer, this is the question, this is the answer, like hypothesis testing, that is fantastic with statistics. But if you start with a story and try to make the data fit your story, you end up giving statistics a bad name.
Well, I think a good place to think about that. So I have been in a situation where a stakeholder came to me with the conclusion that they wanted. And fortunately, we were able to shoot it down very quickly. You go like, no, that's not how it works. Also, the data that you said support your conclusion is so far-fetched and so far removed from it that wouldn't even be persuasive anyhow. But one of the interesting ones is, I can never remember his name, the guy who wrote Freakonomics.
Oh yeah.
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 Stephen somebody. Anyhow, but what
Yeah, Stephen Levitt.
Thank you.
Yeah.
His real gift was that he was able to look around and spot really unusual things. He goes, why is this happening? And which is why he did this research with high stakes testing in public schools and with sumo wrestling and with drug selling street gangs, because he was able to come up with these really peculiar, he says like, wait a second, something's happening here that is strange. And then he says, oh, wait a second, we've set up an incentive system here that probably is going to produce some weird behavior. And so he was able to ask an intriguing question and then find a method to answer it. And again, but that's a very different thing, of course, Andrew, from what you said about people saying, well, this is the conclusion that we want and we're going to try to get it. But he did have, in terms of the storytelling, he says like, wait a second, something here is peculiar, doesn't make sense. And now let's try to investigate it a little more.
Nice. All right, Paul has a question about what if you're doing an analysis and you actually don't know what people might do with the results. Like you're going to tell them something and you don't know what they're going to go do, like what the actions might be. What do we like you can maybe guess, but like is that dangerous? Is that normal? I mean, my experience is quite normal, actually. You don't know everything that someone might do when you give them a result from a data analysis. What do you
Yes,
think?
and I have a response to that one. And I did not address this once. I mentioned it, but I did not address it specifically. This is where the planning comes in. When you are taking on a new project, if there's any way possible to know who is going to be acting on it, who is the final I'm going to do something now person, and what are their options? It comes down to knowing what the specific question is and what the possible outcomes are. So that's one that needs to be addressed in the planning stage. I mean, think about it. There's a lot of things. I make videos and I post them online. And I think I get a lot of views for somebody who makes screen capture recordings about statistics. So I've got like 38 million views across different channels. And I think that's great. On the other hand, if I made videos of people slipping on the ice, I would get more views in a week. Or if I made music videos, or if I did something, and I just kind of go, yeah, but that's just not what I do. And so if I come to somebody and say, I want to know how to get more views, and say like, well, stop talking about statistics and start making more pratfall videos. Like, that's not what I do. And so it's helpful to know the context that your client is going to be operating in and what is potentially something that they could implement.
Yeah, interesting. All right. John Adula has a question about like sometimes when you have a discussion with a stakeholder, you present the thing that you results and they have like a follow-up that you didn't actually prep a plot for or something. Is it like what do you think is good ways to address that or to prep for that ahead of time? John Azula specifically asked like should we have all our plots be or like all our presentation kind of things be these like dynamic plots that you can change it as you're happening and then seeing what's going on? What do you think is a way to think about that?
One word, appendix. So seriously, you make the presentation and it's 7 slides long. By the way, I have my preference is you have a title page. That's slide number 1. Number 2 is you say what the research question was. Slide number 3, you give the answer. This is what you do. And then the remaining slides are justifications for your answer. This is how I got from A to B. This is how I got from A to B. And then what you do is if you feel that there is any possibility of somebody asking for more detail, you have an appendix and you can stick as many slides as you want in there, but they're not going to be part of the presentation unless somebody specifically asks for them. By the way, I avoid interactivity. I just really do because I know it's really cool. It's distracting. It's also hard to make it work. I specifically use Google Slides. I did my presentation today in Google Slides because it restricts what you can do. The same reason I use Google Sheets. It restricts what you can do. and I use Google. It makes you focus on things that work a little bit better. Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do, but they introduce enormous complications, and they often end up being distractions. I will admit, and I feel I'm a little embarrassed to say this to you, Julia, I have never made a Shiny app, never. And I spent a little bit of time the other day trying to work with one to integrate generative AI into R, and I said, like, okay, screw it. This is more trouble than it's worth. I like to keep things very, very simple, but for me, the easiest way to prepare for this is to have an appendix. By the way, if you've got 30 more slides in your appendix and you can flip to them, they're going to be impressed with your foresight. They're also going to be happy, the people who didn't want to see it, that you didn't make them go through 30 slides. Nobody wants to see your data cleaning slides. Nobody. even if it's your best work. They don't want to see, again, for a lot of them say, just tell me, is it yes or no? That's all I want. And you can save the other stuff for an appendix and for people who are specifically interested about it. And maybe you'll even wait till the other people are out of the room before you show them those slides.
Interesting. I think that's really interesting. And the tension that I often see around this is a tension between, we're going to democratize the access to the data. We're going to let everybody everybody in the org will be able to see it and do what they need to, versus the person with like a high level of expertise in the data curating results to have a high level of confidence that what people are looking at is right. And I think that's it sounds like, Bart, your experience leads you to be more on the side of the expert needs to bring the curated results. And a lot of my experiences have pushed me in that direction as well. And that when I hear people be like, we need to democratize access to the data, I'm like, oh no.
Well, I mean, I think it's fine to make this stuff available, but I do think that everybody everywhere should be able to work with data at least a little bit to answer the questions that are directly relevant to them. But I think that for 90% of people, that's going to mean, do you know how to create a spreadsheet, and can you make a bar chart in a spreadsheet? You've got what you need. Democratizing data, yes, everybody needs to work with data. Everybody's life is going to be easier if they can work with a little bit of data, but not everybody needs, the complete census data in front of them. And there's a lot of, but it's at the same time, it is good for an analyst to be able to say, I had to make 37 different judgment calls in how I did this analysis. Here's the list. You can provide a code book, you can provide a list of steps that you took. And on the other hand, I also think that when people want to get into that degree, there's a problem. Look, again, because I'm an academic, one thing that is guaranteed in every single research presentation you ever give is that somebody is going to try to shred your statistical analysis. Somebody's going to go, no, you used the wrong method there, and you didn't control for p-value inflation. You didn't do any of this, and you didn't use a nested modeling. You didn't use my preferred method, and I just kind of go, I realize I can't make all of you happy, but you know what? You're missing the point. And I like to think, especially for those sorts of things, I say, look, you know what? I did the analysis 3 different ways. I got the same result in every one of them. And so I have a lot of confidence that this is a very stable, reliable, meaningful result. And yeah, sure, if you want to get access to the data after you've gone through all the appropriate steps, you can do that, and then you knock yourself out. But I think it also requires having enough confidence. I made judgment calls, but I feel confident they were good ones. Here's the list of them, and you can decide if you want to do something differently. But I wouldn't. I would just say, but don't get distracted from the larger purpose.
Yeah, nice. Nice, nice. That's great. All right. I think we have addressed most of the questions. We're coming up against the hour. Does anybody have a last question that they want to ask? Awesome. Well, Bart, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for preparing and talking about us for some things that are a little more high level. A little about like how to write code, but how to think about the work that we do. I really appreciate you leading us through that. I am going to drop a link to our next event, which is another local Salt Lake person who is presenting for us. So next month we are having a talk by Abby Kaplan, who I think is on the call here. You can wave or say hi. So Abby is going to be speaking about nonlinear continuous predictors in regression models. What do you do when your predictor is not actually linear? What are your sets of options that you have there? So thank you so much for coming. Big thank you to Bart, and we'll hope to see many of you next